Hi guys, here's note chapter 2. What I did was I just copied some pieces of the text that I thought were important that I wanted to talk a little bit more about. The way of being, the culture of deaf culture, and just how different that is from mainstream American hearing culture. I think it's important that that we're aware of that and of the differences. And, that interpreting kind of was a naturally evolving, not even a field, it was a naturally evolving task that people did. People who knew sign language, had family members who were deaf, kind of just became the interpreters for deaf folks in their lives. And so really the support that interpreters showed the community at the time. And the fact that, because they weren't professional interpreters, they didn't go to school to become interpreters, they were trusted members of the community and of families. And they came into the task of interpreting very naturally. They kind of came in the deaf way. There's this term that sometimes is kind of misused these days, but deaf heart. And that's not really a good definition. Lots of people have different feelings about what that actually means, but it's, having deafness in your heart, having a love, respect for the community in your heart. And that's really how interpreters came to be. It was about reciprocity. It was about relationship. It was about being there for people, not for payment, not because you had to, but because these were members of your community that you wanted to see them succeed or get the access that they needed. So RID is the national organization for interpreters in the United States. And it's important for you to know how it started. The Ball State Teachers Conference back in '64, that was the first time that a group of people got together and said, hey, we should make this a field. The field has certainly evolved a whole lot since then, and I expect will evolve a whole lot more going forward. So here, most people call themselves sign language interpreters. I refer to myself as an ASL English interpreter, because I do work with both languages. Some people who aren't in the field will misuse, and will often call sign language interpreters, call them deaf interpreters, because we interpret for deaf people. We will learn that deaf interpreters is actually deaf people who are trained as interpreters. So that's not what we are. We are sign language or American Sign Language interpreters, or ASL English interpreters. And of course, if people are interpreting between other languages, then they would use other terms for other languages. Real quick, I wanted to just clarify some terminology. So transliterating is, for example, in our field, transliterating would be spoken English to assigned English. So same language, different form, spoken versus signed, but they're both English. That's transliterating. Versus translation or translating, which is written, and interpreting, which is English, spoken English to ASL, assigned ASL. So different languages. That's interpreting is between, let's say, ASL and English, two different languages. Transliterating is between signed English and spoken English, same language, different forms. So I think it's important for you to kind of be aware of the terminology and the differences between the two. Also, I know I added some videos in there of, conceptually accurate signed English and pidgin signed English. Just to clarify, these are not languages in themselves. It's just sign in an English word order. And, you know, these doesn't mean that people who use these are wrong or bad or aren't, you know, doing the right thing. People, and we will learn, deaf people, something just dropped. Deaf people sign in lots of different ways, whatever way works for them, and that's what's right for them. So someone isn't more deaf or more this or more something else because they use ASL or they use a more English-based sign. And our job is to match the type of language that the deaf person that we're working with is using. So we're the ones who need to be flexible. But just, I want you to see some of the differences between ASL and a more PSE. PSE is kind of a older term. They now use the term contact language. So it's important, I think, that you see that. Let's see. And then I think another thing that's important for you guys to be aware of, considering that probably most of us, although I know there's some CODIS in the class, and I think that that's great. Some people in the class did have a bringing up kind of in the community. And so I'm not speaking directly to you folks at the moment, but most of us go through interpreter training programs having had little to no interaction with deaf folks in our own lives. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that means that we need to work extra hard to get that, the sensitivity into our bodies and not just into our heads. That deaf heart, that respect and understanding of the language and the culture. Because we weren't brought up that way, we weren't brought up in the deaf community, we need to work harder to forge real relationships with deaf and hard of hearing folks in the community who can help guide us and get us to the kind of interpreters that we need to be. Most interpreters these days are coming through interpreter training programs, and the unfortunate part of that is that a lot of them aren't taking the time or having the opportunity to develop those relationships, and so they look at interpreting as a business, as, you know, I'm a professional interpreter and I do this and I do that and I don't do these other things. And while we are a profession and there are things that we need to kind of uphold to maintain professional status, we need to remember that we wouldn't be here if it weren't for deaf folks. And if the deaf community can't or doesn't accept us as interpreters, then we're not in the field. We won't be on the field very long, for sure. So we need to work harder to get approval from the deaf community, and make those personal ties within the community, because that really is what is key and is so important. So again, making the commitment to immerse yourself in the community, you know, kind of just soak everything in. And the thing that's important is all of this kind of immersing yourself in the community doesn't end on the day you graduate. It's something that needs to happen for the rest of your life while you're in the field, you know. So going to Association for the Deaf, you know, picnics and meetings, and you know, volunteering for, you know, this or that, or, you know, in the community, being part of the community, putting your time in to the community, is what's terribly, terribly important. Because the reciprocity, you know, giving and taking, we are lucky that we're able to learn the language, make a career out of interpreting, and in exchange for that, we owe the community. We owe the community our time and our expertise, and volunteering for things, being available for, you know, maybe assignments that you wouldn't want to necessarily take, or, you know, being part of the community, giving when you can. That is really a prerequisite for being part of the interpreting community, because it's not just a job. It is, you know, it is, you know, we're joining a community, and we are lucky that we're able to do so. And so graduating, when you do graduate, is really the beginning of a lifelong journey. So, you know, making sure that you're always working to develop and further develop your language skills, to think about the work you're doing, work with colleagues, work with deaf folks to improve the interpreting skills that you have, you know, developing people skills and comfort both with deaf people and non-deaf people, always working and learning about the deaf community, giving back in the community for, you know, in appreciation for the gift that has been shared with you, and working hard to earn the trust and support from the community. I can tell you, you know, over my career, there was a time when I was working a lot, and so people saw me all the time, and I had some personal things. My husband was sick. We were kind of, you know, back and forth for a little while. So there was probably a year or so where I really took a step back from the interpreting community, and was focusing on, you know, my family. And then when I started to kind of go back out and do some, you know, be more active in the interpreting community, people would say to me, like, where you been? What have you been doing? Like, what's going on? And is there right? Is there, I mean, I certainly don't need to tell everyone my whole life story, but is there right to you know, to say, we've given all of this stuff to you and now you've been gone. Where have you been? And of course, you know, with a little explanation, everything was fine and it was no big deal. But it's important, you know, that, you know, people feel like, you know, the deaf community gives us this gift and we can't just take it and run away with it. We need to take it and then, you know, continue our support and continue giving and being part of the community. So that's what kind of chapter 2. I did want you to look a little bit into resources in the state. And if you don't live in Massachusetts, you can feel free to research the state that you do live in. I guess that's it for now. Take care, guys.